Hello, my YouTuber friends. Thank you so much for checking back into the channel. This is the Noobish Pilot. Happy New Year. Hope everybody's having a great 2025 thus far in its first 24 hours. And I certainly do hope that it continues to be great. So in our last video, we went ahead and set up the FMC and pre-flighted the airplane. So now we're going to go ahead and go over getting the autopilot set up, as well as pushing back from the gate and getting the engine started and prepared for departure. So for those of you that do not remember, our last flight plan, we're going from Baltimore, Washington International over to Kansas City International, cruising altitude of 34,000 feet. We did already double check the route for any route discontinuities. So now we have to set up our autopilot. So a couple things to do with the autopilot here. In the Boeing 737, of course, it is going to be up here, the autopilot panel. We're kind of going to go from left to right here and go over the different things that this means and kind of how I like to set it up for a flight. So to start, I leave the course alone for now. Like I said in my previous videos, at times you're going to be routed to a different runway, and this is for your ILS and instrument arrivals using your autopilot arrivals. So we'll talk about this a little bit more once we get closer to the landing of this flight. But moving over, what I like to do is I do like to turn on the auto throttle. It is going to show armed here. However, it's not going to start, of course, until you turn the autopilot on once you do take off. As far as the speed is concerned, you can go ahead and set that manually. However, if you do use the LNAV and VNAV, it's going to set it automatically to your route here. So that's what these things mean down here, and I'll kind of zoom in a little bit more. Hopefully you can see them. So for example, here we have 250 knots, and then we have our altitude of 644 or above. So as these different legs happen once autopilot's on, the airplane's going to either accelerate or decelerate to these speeds, and you can see here, oh, we missed a discontinuity. And you can see here how we have different speeds as we keep going up in the flight levels. So for that, I normally do like to set that at our 10 knots above our rotate speed. So in this case, our rotate speed is again right here, VR, which is 136. So we'll go ahead and set this to 146 and do that just by holding your mouse over it, and you can use your squirrel wheel. That's the best way I find it. And let's leave that alone for now. Moving over here, we do have our heading indicator, our heading hold, which is just like it sounds. You'll set it, and then that will have the airplane turn and then hold a particular heading. What I like to do just before departure is just use where my course is set up at. So right now, as you can see in my flight plan, that's what this pink means up here. My flight plan course is at 285. Again, so sometimes air traffic control is going to take you to a runway that may not be necessarily where you want to take off from. You can always request it from a different one, but if you're new, I normally just like to go by what ATC says. And once you are airborne and at a safe altitude, you can always tick that on. And what that will do is point your aircraft towards that magenta line that's going to be on your map here, which will then, once your aircraft intersects with this line, which again we'll go over a little bit more upon takeoff, is when your LNAV will pick up and the airplane will essentially fly itself. So LNAV, how I remember it, so VNAV is vertical navigation, right? So up or down. And LNAV, at least how I remember it, is location navigation, which is going to be on from your map and your flight plan. Again, I know that may not be the exact name for it. That's how I like to remember, and how I think that a lot of newer pilots would remember that as well on the particular airliners. So we will go ahead and set these up here in a minute, or turn those on here in a minute. I'll show you when I normally turn those on. Next is going to be your altitude. So while the VNAV is going to go based off of what is listed in your legs here, again, it'll climb using this climb profile. If you're using VNAV, it will only go to whatever this is set to, meaning so VNAV is going to be how it gets to the altitude, and this is the altitude that it's going to go at. So even though the FMC may say to climb all the way up to 34,000 feet, which is what our cruising altitude is for this flight, if we left that at 10,000 feet, the aircraft will climb that high and not go any higher. So you'll want to go ahead and, I normally initially, while we're on the ground here, set this to our cruising altitude. So again, this case is going to be 34,000 feet. Again, it's a little bit annoying to get to. It goes kind of slow, but we'll just keep hitting that scroll wheel until we get to 34,000 feet. In that way, the airplane will climb to the climb profile in the FMC, which is listed at 34,000 feet, and it will hold at 34,000 feet. One thing we'll talk about in the descent is that once you do get to your cruising altitude, the VNAV will also descend for you. However, again, if this is still set at 34,000 feet, it's going to hold there. It's not going to go any less than that. So again, once we're airborne and we start working on the different phases of flight as far as the climb, the cruise, the descent, and the landing, we'll talk about that a little bit more. So for now, just leave this as your cruising altitude here. Vert speed or vertical speed, if you tick this on, what this is going to do is basically override the climb profile for the FMC, and it's just going to go up at that vertical speed. So for example, if you were to take that up to, so if we turn on, I'm going to turn on the flight directors here and I'll explain that in a minute. If we go to the vertical speed here and we go up, the aircraft is going to climb at whatever it says in here, or descend if that says negative, that amount of feet in a minute. So for example, when we take off, if we wanted to set a climb of 2,200 feet per minute, we can do that. And that's going to override your climb profile here, and it's going to do a constant climb to that cruising altitude. And again, once it reaches that, it's going to level off and that will go back to zero. So I do use VNAV and LNAV doing my flights of the Boeing 737, so I'm going to click that off for now. Some people do prefer the vertical speed. I'm not one of those. Again, it's all preference, so I'm just going to turn that flight director off for now. These are going to be your autopilot engage and disengage buttons, so of course you'll press that once. Right now it's not going to work because you're on the ground, so it's not going to actually turn on, but you would press that to actually turn on the autopilot. And I like to set a keybind for that just so as soon as I take off and I'm at that safe speed and I bring the gear up and everything else, I can just set the autopilot and the airplane begins to fly. The next thing you'll want to check is that both of these switches are on. This is the flight director. So while the autopilot is giving the airplane kind of, how do I want to word this? Kind of giving it goals to meet. The flight director is actually the brains, and it's going to help it get to those goals and help it, actually either turn to that heading you're looking for or climb to that altitude you're looking for. And again, that's all done via the FMC, which we programmed from that flight plan off of SimBrief. So just keep that in mind. So at that point, that's kind of all the autopilot stuff that you'll need to kind of get started here. So at this point, what I like to do is, now that I have everything set on the autopilot panel, I have my heading where my flight plan is going to go, my speed, 10 knots over the rotate speed in my cruising altitude. I'm going to go ahead and prepare for the engine start now. So again, our last video, we do have the APU on and running. Looks like the generators popped off. We'll turn those back on, no big deal. But we're going to go ahead and set up and prepare for push and the engine start procedure. Now again, that panel lighting is down. One thing I'll also just advise you to do right now is to set this cruising altitude here. That is going to be for your cabin pressure, so you'll want to make sure that that's set, obviously, so your cabin remains pressurized as you kind of go along here. So we are now ready for the pushback and engine start procedure, so I'm going to go ahead and knock that down now, and we'll jump right into that. So the pushback can be requested. I have GSX. I'm not going to use that just for the sake of this. But I'm just going to use the onboard one. So if you do the ground services, or it's probably going to make me use GSX, I'll bet. Oh, I didn't call for clearance yet. So you do have to call for the clearance through air traffic control. So if you do this, request IFR clearance for instrument flight plan, as we already brought that in via the SimBrief plan and executed that towards our instruments. That's what it's going to go off of. So you can see there it's requesting. And you can see here that they're giving me instructions. The in-game ATC I'm not a fan of. Again, our flight plan says we're going to 34,000 feet. This is telling us to go to 1,200. It's just not going to work. So, I mean, I'll acknowledge that. And as we kind of climb up, it should automatically update and give you the instructions and altitude to climb to, but sometimes it doesn't. And again, I just think that that's a bug that's in the game right now. It is a brand new game, so we have to be patient while they go ahead and work those bugs out. So we'll go ahead and read that back, and they'll read back that our readback is correct. And that's a lot of tongue twister there. So we are now ready to go ahead and push. So before we go ahead and do the pushback procedure, what you'll want to do is make sure that your position lights are on, set to steady, and that anti-collision light is turned on. Again, from the last video, the anti-collision light is basically a notification to the ground crew that, hey, the aircraft is going to be moving or the engines are going to be starting, and you need to stand clear of any vital parts of the airplane, such as the wheels or the engine. So we're going to go ahead and request that pushback procedure now. And then we'll go ahead and get ready to start this beast up. So once that is accepted, we'll go ahead and release the parking brake. And then you should start to see your airplane go backwards a little bit. Again, if that's working. You do have the instructions over here as well if you want them to push you to the left or to the right or just straight back or stop. I'm just going straight back just for the sake of this video, but it looks like it's not going to work, right? Fantastic. It's not going to work, so it's not going to push us back. Fantastic. So, again, a new game. Let's go to the outside here. That is very bugged. I think I might actually attach now. It's going to probably push the front of the airplane up off the ground, like it normally does at least. So you can see it down there. So once the push begins, you can go ahead and start the engines. So we're going to go ahead and knock that down there for now. And first thing we're going to do is we're going to turn on all of our fuel pumps at this point. And we're also going to turn on our engine bleeds. Leave the APU on for now because the engines are actually going to use the power of the APU to go ahead and actually light and start. So you'll come up here to your overhead panel. You're going to slide this, whichever one you want to start. Of course, this is the left engine. That's the right engine. So we'll start the left first. And we'll go ahead and flip that to ground. Once that's on ground, you can come down to your engine displays down here, and you're going to see that they're starting to wind, or the left one's starting to wind up a little bit. Wait till this one gets to about 19 to 21, and then we'll go ahead and introduce fuel, and then we'll hopefully have a successful engine start. So there's 19. Come down to your throttle panel, introduce some fuel there. Monitor this. You'll be able to hear it starting up. And then as soon as this begins to climb, once that gets to be about over 100, you're going to see us climbing rapidly. Come on back up, flip the starter off, and we're going to wash, rinse, and repeat for the right. So we have a successful light on the left engine. We're now starting the right. Again, 19 to 21 here, and we'll introduce fuel. All right, we are good. So let's go ahead and introduce fuel there. Let's watch this. It is continuing to go up, so we do have a successful engine start on the right as well. Flip that to off, flip that back to neutral. Once that's started, we can go ahead and turn on our generators and turn off our APU generators. We no longer need the APU. We'll go ahead and turn off the APU air bleed, and then we'll go ahead and turn off the APU altogether. Ground power is going to be off as well. And both engines are started. If this pushback procedure was working, this is when you'll go ahead and set flaps. So again, our takeoff flaps is going to be at a 5. We're also going to go ahead and set up our auto brake for rejected takeoff, and we're going to arm our speed brakes. What that does is that the auto takeoff, if you're rolling down the runway, I don't know the exact speed you have to get over, but once you do get over that particular speed, if you do have to reject takeoff and you pull back the throttle, the speed brakes or spoilers will deploy, as well as the auto braking system will kick in to slow the aircraft down for rejected takeoff. If we were on the ramp right now, we're going to go ahead and turn on our VNAV and LNAV. It's very hard to kind of pronounce or see the pronunciation in the lights here, but you'll see that they turn on green, and then you can see them down here. Auto throttle is still armed. And at this point, again, use your imagination that we're out on the ramp. We'll stop the pushback even though we didn't go anywhere, but just to get the taxi procedures. And then we'll go ahead and request our IFR taxi. And you're going to notice once I come out here that once air traffic control does give us that clearance, if you do have the visual assistances on, which I recommend keeping on just until you're comfortable with the airport layout, it's giving us our taxi directions down here. And you're going to see once we acknowledge those, it's going to give us a little ribbon here to follow out and to taxi out to the active runway. So at that point, the aircraft is started, flight plan is filed, and we're now ready to taxi and get underway. So I'll see you in the next video again, folks. Thank you so much for tuning into the Noobish Pilot. I really appreciate it. If you did get anything from this video, please go ahead and like and subscribe. If you do have any questions or concerns, go ahead and post them below. Definitely look forward to seeing you on the next one. And as always, safe travels.